Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a massive financial shift that's looming on the horizon for retirees. We're talking about the 2026 Medicaid Estate Recovery Program, commonly known as MERP. Look, it is frequently called the single most underreported act of wealth confiscation facing the American middle class today. I know, it's a pretty heavy topic, but truly understanding it is your absolute first step to taking back control.
To really grasp the weight of what's happening here, we have to face a pretty devastating reality. There is a saying that hits the nail on the head. There's no such thing as free government health care for the elderly. There is only deferred billing. Let me tell you about Sarah. She's a 51-year-old teacher in Ohio. Sadly, her father passed away after spending 3 years in a memory care facility. Now, that care was paid for by Medicaid, and a social worker had actually assured Sarah it was completely free. But shortly after he died, she ended up holding a certified letter from the Ohio Attorney General's office.
That letter? It was a bill for $347,000. Just let that staggeringly huge number sink in for a second. That was the lien the state of Ohio placed on her father's completely paid-off home. The state was legally recovering the cost of his care. And because the home literally has to be sold to satisfy that massive lien, well, once you factor in the realtor commissions and closing costs, Sarah is left with practically nothing. A lifetime of her father's hard work was just reduced to a fraction, turning what absolutely should have been a family inheritance into a mere settlement.
So how in the world does this actually happen? Well, it starts by completely shattering a very common illusion that people have regarding Medicare and Medicaid. You see, Medicare is not a long-term safety net. It covers short-term skilled nursing care. Think of things like physical therapy after a hip replacement, and it strictly cuts you off at day 101. Medicaid, on the other hand, is essentially a poverty program. It's specifically designed by the government to cover unlimited long-term custodial care, but, and this is a huge but, only after you've exhausted almost all of your personal assets.
The reality of what elderly care actually looks like day to day might genuinely surprise you. A whopping 85% of nursing home residents require custodial care. We aren't talking about medical rehabilitation here. This is everyday help with bathing, eating, and just navigating daily life safely, which is especially crucial for those dealing with dementia. And here's the really harsh reality. Medicare completely refuses to pay for custodial care. Not a single cent.
Since Medicare won't cover it, families are forced to pay totally out of pocket. And the cost projections for 2026 are terrifying. We're looking at approximately $144,000 a year for custodial nursing home care. That breaks down to roughly $12,000 every single month in an average metropolitan market. To put that into perspective, the median 65-year-old American has a retirement nest egg of right around $280,000. At these rates, that entire lifetime of careful savings gets completely vaporized in less than 2 years of care. Once that nest egg is gone, well, families naturally apply for Medicaid to cover those ongoing bills. And bam, that brings us right to the trap, MERP, the Medicaid Estate Recovery Program. This is a federal mandate stemming from the 1993 OBRA law, and it literally requires states to recover long-term care costs from deceased recipients' estates. Now, hospital workers will often reassure panicking families saying, "Oh, don't worry, the house is safe from Medicaid's asset testing." But there is a glaring, massive omission there. The house is only safe while the recipient is alive. But here's where things get incredibly messy. The execution of this federal mandate varies widely depending on your zip code. For example, in Florida, strong state constitutional homestead protections mean the state generally cannot force the sale of a primary residence passing to qualified heirs. But contrast that with a state like Ohio, which uses an expanded recovery definition that can aggressively pierce right through living trusts and joint tenancies. Meanwhile, California has actually reformed its laws to only recover from probate assets, so the state you happen to live in drastically alters your family's financial destiny.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Hey, I'll just sign the house over to my kids before I get sick. Well, that brings us to the unforgiving 5-year look-back trap. When you apply for Medicaid, the state legally scrutinizes every single financial transaction you've made over the prior 60 months. If you execute a last-minute deed transfer to a child, say in year -1, and then suddenly need a nursing home in year 0, the state triggers a severe penalty. Transferring a $360,000 house could mathematically disqualify you from receiving Medicaid for over 3 years. That leaves your family completely stranded with impossible medical bills.
Okay, so how can families actually navigate this legally? What's the solution? Well, it requires building what is essentially a legal force field around the family home. Let's walk through 5 very specific, actionable defense strategies you can use to protect yourself.
Strategy 1 is the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust, or MAPT for short. This is an irrevocable trust. The moment you transfer the deed of your home into this trust, the asset is legally removed from your estate. Because it's no longer legally yours, it effectively becomes invisible to the state. It totally avoids probate and completely dodges the MERP recovery. Now, the major catch here is that you absolutely must set this up and fund it at least 5 full years before you ever need care, so you can completely clear that 60-month look-back window.
But look, what if you don't have 5 years to plan? Strategy 2 outlines a really beautiful legal carve-out called the Caregiver Child Exception. If an adult child moves into their parent's home, provides meticulously documented care for at least 2 full years right before the parent enters a facility, and can prove that this care actually prevented earlier institutionalization, the law allows the home to be transferred to that child completely penalty-free. It protects the home without ever triggering that 5-year clock.
Moving right along to Strategy 3, we have the brilliantly named Ladybird Deed. Now, this is available in a handful of states like Florida, Texas, and Michigan, and it's basically an enhanced life estate deed. It allows you to keep absolute control of your property while you're alive. You can sell it, you can mortgage it, whatever you want, but upon your death, the property automatically transfers to your beneficiary, completely bypassing the probate process. In states where MERP only targets probate assets, this highly affordable little deed is a devastatingly effective shield. Strategy 4 is specifically for married couples, and it focuses on spousal refusal and the Community Spouse Resource Allowance, or CSRA. Federal law in 2026 allows a healthy spouse to keep a maximum allowance of about $157,000 in countable assets. In certain states, the healthy spouse can officially utilize a legal technique called spousal refusal, where they formally decline to financially support the institutionalized spouse. This effectively forces Medicaid to qualify the sick spouse based solely on their own assets, which preserves the healthy partner's immediate financial stability.
And finally, Strategy 5 is the Long-Term Care Partnership Program. By purchasing a qualified long-term care insurance policy, you literally create a dollar-for-dollar legal shield for your assets. For example, if your policy pays out $200,000 for your long-term care, you're legally permitted to keep an additional $200,000 in countable assets, and those assets are fully exempt from MERP estate recovery later on. Yes, it absolutely requires paying premiums right now, but it's a vital, necessary alternative to total asset liquidation down the line.
With all of these tools on the table, I need you to beware of the 2026 wealth distractions. The financial media loves to spend endless hours talking about the $15 million estate tax exemption or, small $6,000 senior tax deductions. Guys, these are massive distractions for middle-class retirees. The true mandatory clawback machine that is systematically coming from middle-class generational wealth isn't the estate tax, it's MERP. So to combat this, here are your immediate, non-negotiable marching orders. 1. Inventory every single piece of real estate you own. 2. Value your assets realistically. 3. Find a board-certified elder law attorney through the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, or NAELA. 4. Just pay for the consultation. Seriously, do it. And 5. Start that 5-year clock today. The emphasis here is on intense urgency. You have to build this legal architecture while you're healthy, long before a sudden medical crisis hits.
Ultimately, it all boils down to one absolutely critical question. Will your family inherit a home or a settlement? Refuse to let the state blindly consume what took a lifetime of hard work to build. Take proactive action and consult the right experts today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.